Chapter 1404, Amaze the World with a Single Brilliant Feat. Chapter 1404, Amaze the World with a Single Brilliant Feat. At the border of Titanic Star, all the disciples were dumbfounded. They were all shocked. Everyone's gaze was fixed on Luo Quan as Luo Quan's pathetic roar reverberated in their ears. Phantasmagoria, it's Phantasmagoria, one of the disciples shouted. Suddenly, everyone understood. Looking at the sight before their eyes, Luo Quan was obviously in Jian Wushuang's Phantasmagoria. He couldn't shake it off, he couldn't free himself from it. He could only suffer under the effect of the Phantasmagoria. Such a scary Phantasmagoria, even Luo Quan couldn't shake it off. What did he go into the Phantasmagoria? How could he be in so much pain? The surrounding disciples were terrified. What they didn't know was that the reason the 18 Azura hell that real god demonic rain created was to torture. It was a method to torture one's consciousness. 18 Azura hell had 18 floors of dreamland in total. Every floor was a phantasmagoria of suffering. Jian Wushuang was performing the first 6 floors. Luo Quan drowned in the 6 floors of phantasmagoria and he was naturally suffering. No, no. His pathetic groans continued, but suddenly, it was as though Luo Quan's tongue was removed. His words were blocked and they could barely hear noises from his nose. He seemed to be saying, "Let me live, please. Show mercy. Let me go, please. Let me go." That sight struck up terror. The disciples were imagining just how scary the phantasmagoria was that was making Luo Quan beg for mercy. In the Milky Way, Hall Master Yuan and the other 10 Deacon Elderless stood side by side as they watched the sight before them. Even the Deacon Elderless were shocked. Previously, in the Supreme Tower, his consciousness attack couldn't be performed as he was fighting against a war puppet. Now that he is facing a human cultivator, he could put many tricks to play. Just the phantasmagoria that he showed currently is impressive enough. True. Luo Quan is a genius disciple in the lineage of Star. He has high hopes of entering Star Palace. Although he isn't as good at consciousness, he is at least at the level of an advanced universe god in the 3rd heaven. But he begged for mercy in the phantasmagoria that Jian Wushuang put him in. To be able to do so, not only would it require Jian Wushuang to have a stronger consciousness than he does, but it also requires a terrifying dreamland technique. I'm curious about what Luo Quan went through in the dreamland. The Deacon Elderless conversed casually. As dreamland was only aimed at one single person, only that particular person could experience the phantasmagoria in the dreamland. The others could only see Luo Quan in agony. He looked like he was suffering, but no one knew what he was going through in the dreamland. On Titanic Star, the disciples saw Luo Quan in pain and everyone gulped. Chu Yang, who was in the crowd, was terrified too. I already reminded Luo Quan to be careful of Jian Wushuang's consciousness attack, but in the end, he still failed. Chu Yang shook his head and sighed. Back when he had met Jian Wushuang in the Milky Way, he had fought with Jian Wushuang and he taught him a lesson. Hence, in the entire lineage of Star, only he knew that Jian Wushuang's power wasn't as weak as it looked, especially his consciousness attack. Hence, he had especially reminded Luo Quan earlier. However, even with his reminder, Luo Quan still fell into Jian Wushuang's dreamland and was unable to free himself from it. On the other side, Lu Han's face grew grave. He finally knew why Hall Master Yuan and the other Deacon Elderless had agreed that Jian Wushuang was stronger than him. Even Luo Quan couldn't withstand it and got struck by the phantasmagoria. If it was him, he would not be able to fight back either. Am I leaving lineage of Star? Lu Han felt bitter. In the middle of the battlefield, the veins on Luo Quan's forehead and arms all popped up. He looked extremely ferocious. He was still in the dreamland and he was suffering on the 3rd floor of dreamland, Ironwood Hell. Jian Wushuang was standing there with a cold expression. "Qiu Yu, did you see that?" Jian Wushuang asked. "Yes, we saw, mister. We saw." There was an obvious excitement in Qiu Yu's voice. "That will do." Jian Wushuang nodded faintly. He was too lazy to take another look at Luo Quan, but he looked at the Deacon Elderly who was the host for the rotation battle. "Can you announce the result?" The Deacon Elderly was stunned but immediately responded. "I announce that, in this battle, Jen Wushuang is the winner. The deacon elderly announced the result straight away. Of course, even if he didn't, everyone at the scene could tell. Luo Quan's consciousness was drowning in the dreamland. He couldn't shake it off. If Jen Wushuang were to take action then, he could have killed Luo Quan easily. Jen Wushuang turned around and walked to the back after the announcement. Jen Wushuang, Luo Quan's phantasmagoria, the deacon elderly couldn't help but say. Soon, he will come back to reality, Jen Wushuang said and left without turning back. As expected, Luo Quan, who went through the 6 floors of Dreamland, slowly recovered. However, even though his consciousness had recovered, he was still terrified. Jen Wushuang. Luo Quan stared at Jen Wushuang, but there wasn't any sort of denial. There was only terror. No one knew how much indescribable torture he had gone through in the Dreamland in a short period of time. The suffering was so real that he would never forget it for the rest of his life. It was the scariest dreamland he had encountered since he had started cultivation. He definitely didn't want to experience such a dreamland a second time. Hence, he naturally didn't dare to provoke Jen Wushuang again. He could only move back with some help from 2 other disciples. In the first battle, in the rotation battle, Jen Wushuang had won. The result naturally shocked the surrounding disciples. Jen Wushuang defeated Luo Quan? He didn't even move an inch. He only performed a dreamland technique and defeated Luo Quan. He was totally thrashed. How could it be? Isn't Jen Wushuang always weak? 800 years ago, when he first came to the lineage of Star, any ordinary disciple could easily have trampled him. Jen Wushuang improved tremendously in the past 800 years. His power increased so significantly, but he never shows off. Even when all of us doubted his power and thought he wasn't qualified to become a disciple of Star Palace, he never explained himself. During this battle, he proved himself to us with his power. His patience and endurance is next level, amazing the world with a single brilliant feat. Jen Wushuang, impressive. Chapter 1405 Rotation Battle. Chapter 1405 Rotation Battle. If the disciples had been in doubt of Jen Wushuang's power and thought he wasn't qualified to be a disciple of Star Palace, the doubts had definitely vanished after the battle between him and Luo Quan. Since the very beginning, Jen Wushuang had never once made an explanation. But he proved himself with absolute power during the battle. From that day on, in Lineage of Star, there wouldn't be anyone who was in doubt of his ability as a disciple of Star Palace. Then, the rotation battles continued. Jen Wushuang returned outside Titanic Star and watched quietly as he recovered his soul power. Very soon, his second rotation battle began. The next battle will be Jen Wushuang versus Xiao Yu. The deacon elderly's voice reverberated on Titanic Star. Jen Wushuang and Xiao Yu, who were both called upon, walked forward. The 2 of them stood opposite one another in the distance. Xiao Yu was just an ordinary disciple and she was weaker in power compared to Luo Quan. If there wasn't any accident during the battle, there wouldn't be any suspense. Jen Wushuang, perform the trick that you used on Luo Quan. Xiao Yu looked solemn as she stared at Jen Wushuang. Although she was extremely astonished by the sight of Jen Wushuang defeating Luo Quan, the phantasm that Jen Wushuang performed instilled fear in Xiao Yu. However, she was afraid of Jen Wushuang's phantasm only. As for the other attacks, she believed that Jen Wushuang wouldn't be her match. As long as I can endure his phantasmagoria images and shake off his dreamland, I will win the battle. Xiao Yu clenched her fists. When Jen Wushuang heard her, he shook his head and said, I don't need to pull that trick when I'm against you. Are you humiliating me? Xiao Yu got furious. Let's see what you have. Swoosh. Xiao Yu took action directly. She had a purple long spear in her hand. The moment the purple long spear appeared, there was an explosion of huge power immediately. Swoosh. The long spear turned into a bunch of crimson-purple rays. It pierced the void and appeared before Jen Wushuang. It had yet to reach Jen Wushuang and he could feel the terrifying, spiraling force that the tip of the long spear had brought about. Jen Wushuang didn't look like he had moved much, but just as the purple long spear was about to stab his body, vroom, a vast expanse of soul power suddenly soared and immediately formed into a huge black tortoise on the surface of Jen Wushuang's body. The purple long spear stabbed the black tortoiseshell and there was a loud clash, but it didn't move an inch. What? Xiao Yu was shocked. Just then, Jian Wushuang saw a ray of sharp light. Roar! 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 3 roars were heard simultaneously. Suddenly, 3 huge demonic dragons transformed from the billowing soul power on Titanic Star. The 3 demonic dragons were pitch black and they gave out fierce aura. It was as though they came from a borderless hell and they flew out like lightning. The 3 demonic dragons charged towards Xiao Yu in unison. The strong, imposing aura that the demonic dragons brought along frightened Xiao Yu. She could feel that with one of the dragons would be extremely difficult to fight off, let alone the fact that there were 3 in total then. Go away! Xiao Yu screamed and wielded the purple long spear in her hand. The eruption of her divine power suddenly became 3 strikes of lightning. They suddenly flew at the skulls of 3 demonic dragons. However, the 3 demonic dragons were moving flexibly in the void and they dodged Xiao Yu's long spear easily. They are so flexible. Xiao Yu was terrified. The very next moment, the 3 demonic dragons appeared next to her and started tearing at her. Xiao Yu didn't endure long before she was defeated. In the boundless Milky Way, the Deacon Elderless laughed at the sight. Just as we expected, Jian Wushuang didn't give his all in the Supreme Tower. Yeah. For instance, he only put 1 demonic dragon into play when he was in Supreme Tower. The demonic dragon could barely be evenly matched with an ordinary advanced universe god in the 3rd heaven. He put 3 dragons to play at one goal and it is only natural that Xiao Yu couldn't fight against them. Xiao Yu intended to make Jian Wushuang perform the phantasmagoria trick that he used against Luo Quan. But, in the end, Jian Wushuang defeated her with just his consciousness manipulation method alone. Jian Wushuang defeated Xiao Yu and it was within everyone's expectations. Everyone accepted the result easily. But their fight still shocked many disciples. However, when he fought against Xiao Yu, he didn't even use any secret skills. He won merely with the manipulation of consciousness. It was obvious that Jian Wushuang knew more than just pulling one into dreamland. The rotation battles were rather ferocious. Everyone had to go through 9 battles. At the beginning, Jian Wushuang only fought against ordinary disciples like Luo Quan and Xiao Yu. They were hardly any troubler for Jian Wushuang. However, his 3rd opponent was a disciple of Star Palace. The next battle will be Jian Wushuang versus Xia Feng. On Titanic Star, Jian Wushuang and Xia Feng stood opposite one another. Xiao Feng was in a crimson robe. Although he looked young, he had silver-white hair. Then, Xia Feng looked at Jian Wushuang. I heard that you gave my people a lesson on Tai Yuan Star? Yes, Jian Wushuang nodded, making no attempt at denial. Those were just servants. I had nothing to do with them. They behaved wrongly, and you, as a disciple of Star Palace, took action to give them a lesson. It is only right and proper. I don't mind. However, I will not let you win against me in today's fight, Xia Feng said. Then we shall see if you have the power to, Jian Wushuang replied coldly. I'll let you know, Xia Feng smiled. Jian Wushuang, I know your consciousness attack is very powerful, especially your dreamland. However, I am different from Luo Quan and Xiao Yu. They are only ordinary disciples. They never once had a chance to enter Reset Palace to train their consciousness. But I trained for a very long time in Reset Palace. My consciousness strength already reached the level of an advanced universe god in the 3rd heaven. I am only 1 step away from a peak universe god in the 3rd heaven. Can your dreamland do anything to me? There's only one way to find out. Jian Wushuang didn't say much but flipped his palm and Blood Mountain's sword appeared in his hand. Xia Feng too took out his divine weapon. It was a pair of gold shackles that looked extremely heavy and the aura it gave out was rather fierce too. It begins. Xia Feng smiled and in the next moment his body shook and he plunged towards Jian Wushuang at a ghostly speed. Jian Wushuang's eyes were like blazing fires. The moment he saw Xia Feng move, vast soul power swept out and suddenly transformed into 3 huge demonic dragons again. Chapter 1406 8 wins out of 8. Chapter 1406 8 wins out of 8. Looking at the 3 demonic dragons, the surrounding disciples were shocked. Jian Wushuang defeated Xiao Yu with the 3 demonic dragons. But then, the opponent of the 3 demonic dragons was Xie Feng, who was much stronger than Xiao Yu. Humph! Xie Feng humped, and then the gold maces in his hands gave out a resplendent golden light. The 2 gold maces went through the void like lightning and reappeared above the 3 demonic dragons' skulls. Thud, thud, thud. The 3 continuous, low thuds were heard and a fierce divine power exploded. The 3 demonic dragons' skull broke and an enormous amount of soul power dispersed. Xie Feng moved and appeared before Jian Wushuang. He slammed down the 2 gold maces without pulling any funny business. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes but didn't dodge. The black tortoise shell on the surface of his body gave out a sharp brightness. Dang! Dang! The gold mace hit the shell and the huge black tortoise vibrated vigorously, but it didn't show any sign that it was going to collapse. This shell is quite sturdy, huh? Xie Feng complimented, but suddenly, there was a surge of golden light from his body. There was originally just 2 arms, but suddenly there were another 2 muscular arms that popped up. Now he had 4 arms in total and every arm held a gold mace. Break! Xie Feng roared and the 4 arms waved together. The 4 gold mace carried great power and slammed down on the tortoise shell like lightning. Bang! 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 There was loud clashing sound that rang continuously. The gold mace hit the tortoise shell over and over again, and every time the shell would vibrate vigorously. As the number of times the gold mace hit the tortoise shell grew, the entire black tortoise started trembling in the balance. Xie Feng was obviously much stronger than Xiao Yu. He lives up to his identity as a disciple of Star Palace, Jian Wushuang complimented. Then, he suddenly lifted his head. Xie Feng, didn't you want to experience my dreamland technique? Let me fulfill your request. As Jian Wushuang spoke, there was a flash of crimson light that spurted from his eyes. The crimson light was like a huge crimson sun. It was so eye-catching that everyone in the area couldn't help but look over. Xie Feng naturally looked towards the crimson sun as well. Suddenly, the surrounding image churned and he came to the first floor of the borderless hell. It's dreamland. Break! Break it! Xie Feng roared and his consciousness in the sea of consciousness surged in madness. He wanted to shake off the dreamland. But at that very moment, Jian Wushuang, who was protected by the black tortoise, suddenly charged forward and wielded Blood Mountain sword. Break! Xie Feng's entire body was straining with anger. With his fierce and determined consciousness, he finally came back to reality from the dreamland. I'm out. Xie Feng just revealed his joyous expression and suddenly a chilly sword gleam continuously grew in his eyes. Too close. The distance was too close. When he realized, it was already too late for him to avoid any tricks. Swoosh. The sword light stopped 1 centimeter before his throat. Then, a cold voice was heard. Xie Feng, you lost. The voice was cold and expressionless, but it sounded like a heavy explosion to Xie Feng's ears. How could it be? Xie Feng shivered and he was dissatisfied. After all, he had already freed himself from the dreamland, but in the end, he still lost. Just a little, just that little. If I were to shake the dreamland off slightly earlier, I would be able to block his sword in time. Xie Feng mumbled to himself, but he had already seen the reason as to why he had lost to Jian Wushuang. At the end of the day, it was because his consciousness was slightly weaker. Hence, he couldn't shake off the dreamland earlier. After all, Jian Wushuang could totally take action the moment he fell into dreamland. However, although he shook off the dreamland, he was slower in speed to the extent that he couldn't block Jian Wushuang's sword in time. Jian Wushuang, Xie Feng lifted his head and looked at Jian Wushuang. Your consciousness and the dreamland attack are really powerful. No wonder you could win against Luo Quan so easily. The other 8 disciples in the second rotation battle wouldn't be able to resist that, besides Ling Feibai. Even if they could free themselves from the dreamland, they wouldn't be able to block your sword. As for Ling Feibai, his strength of consciousness reached the level of a peak universe god in the 3rd heaven long ago. With your magic alone, it would be impossible for you to take him. Oh! Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. All right, let's announce the results. Xie Feng looked at the deacon elderly by his side. The deacon elderly immediately announced the result. The one who had won the battle was Jian Wushuang. However, even though Jian Wushuang had won, many disciples felt that it was a pity for Xie Feng because Xie Feng had freed himself from the dreamland. It was merely because he was slightly slower that he couldn't block Jian Wushuang's sword in time. Otherwise, no one would have been able to tell who would win the battle. Above the boundless Milky Way, even Xie Feng lost to Jian Wushuang. It seems that the only one who could defeat him in the rotation battle is Ling Feibai. TSK. It's a pity, but it's not definite. I feel that Jian Wushuang still has my trump cards hidden in his pocket. I think so too. Haha, let's continue to watch. The deacon elderless chatted amongst themselves casually. They were in a good mood. They were glad to see the disciples under them fight vigorously. On Titanic Star, the rotation battle continued. The rest of the battle was just as Xie Feng had said. There was no one from the rest of the disciples who could resist Jian Wushuang's dreamland, besides Ling Baifei. Even if they resisted and shook it off, they couldn't block Jian Wushuang's sword in time. In the end, they could only be defeated by Jian Wushuang, one after another. The time flew by. After half a day, the rotation battle came to an end. By that time, Jian Wushuang had already been through 8 out of 9 battles. In the 8 battles, he had fought against 8 disciples. The result was 8 wins out of 8 and there was only one left. The opponent for his last battle was similarly a genius that had experienced 8 wins out of 8. His name was Ling Feibai, lineage of star, the battle among disciples who were universe gods in the second heaven. The last rotation battle would be between the strongest two. Chapter 1407, The Battle Between the Strongest Two. Chapter 1407, The Battle Between the Strongest Two. The battle between the strongest two is finally coming. Many disciples around the vast galaxy were excited. Even the elderly deacons were looking forward to it. Guess who will win the next battle? A woman in a green robe said. Definitely Ling Feibai. But it's uncertain how many difficulties Jian Wushuang can bring to him. A strong man said. Indeed, Ling Feibai is much stronger than other disciples, including the disciples of the Star Palace. Although Jian Wushuang had an excellent performance, he still cannot rival Ling Feibai. But he will pose great challenges for Ling Feibai. Exactly. The elderly deacons chatted and laughed casually. In the crowd, the Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao looked at each other face to face, and both of them could read each other's minds. In addition to the Supreme Palace Master, only they knew the secret of Jian Wushuang. He was just a universe god in the first heaven. It was already remarkable for a universe god in the first heaven to have had such a great performance. It would be surprising if Jian Wushuang could win the second round of the battle. What's more, it would be a miracle for a universe god in the first heaven to win the battle and keep the position of the disciples in the Star Palace. But now, Jian Wushuang had not only made a miracle, he was also competing with Ling Feibai, the most excellent universe god in the second heaven. This was far beyond their expectations. No one could stay calm if they heard that a universe god in the first heaven could rival the top universe god in the second heaven in the Star Palace. We still don't know how much he can surprise us. The Hall Master Yuan said excitedly, watching Jian Wushuang's battle. Jian Wushuang was now standing face to face with Ling Feibai on the Starland. I thought it would be Xie Feng or Mo Ziyi who would come to the final round to battle with me, but I never expected you. Ling Feibai looked at Jian Wushuang with a gentle smile. But I expected it. Jian Wushuang smiled. Ling Feibai showed his contempt. I know you are good at consciousness attacks and phantasmagoria, but that means nothing to me. Come on, show me all your power. Ling Feibai said. He stood there confidently. Don't worry, you won't be disappointed. Jian Wushuang said. Jian Wushuang started to generate power. As he blinked his eyes a little, a scarlet halo burst out. 18 Azura Hell again. That's another 18 Azura Hell. It is the phantasmagoria from Jian Wushuang. He was using such powerful skills so early. Many disciples watching the battle could not help but tighten their hands. Jian Wushuang had used this phantasmagoria several times in the battle and no one could resist it. Even the genius Xia Feng and Mo Ziyi couldn't resist this phantasmagoria from Jian Wushuang. With this tactic, Jian Wushuang defeated the other 8 disciples. Now, facing Ling Feibai, the strongest universe god in the second heaven, Jian Wushuang decided to use his skills right at the beginning. The 18 Azura Hell started to come into play, and meanwhile, Jian Wushuang started to wave his sword. His swordsmanship was as quick and violent as a blazing flint. He had created it during the 90-year cultivation in the Longgang Mystery Land. This swordsmanship was called the Fire Light. Buzz. Ling Feibai at first felt surprised about the attack, but soon he calmed down. It's a good skill, but it still won't affect me. Ling Feibai laughed. Jian Wushuang was shocked. Even geniuses like Xia Feng and Mo Ziyi struggled to resist my phantasmagoria, but Ling Feibai isn't affected at all? At that moment, Jian Wushuang saw that Ling Feibai wave a purple soft sword. You are good at swordsmanship, so am I. Ling Feibai said. The purple sword began to generate power. It collided with Jian Wushuang's sword, causing tremendous sparks. Bang! Jian Wushuang suffered a great backlash while Ling Feibai remained unaffected. Then Jian Wushuang started to generate his black tortoise to block the attack of the purple sword light, but the black tortoise's power dissipated quickly under the attack and Jian Wushuang was forced to retreat instantly. Your defense is not bad. But I haven't shown my true power. Then Ling Feibai's eyes turned bright and purple. He generated another sword light again, of the same size as the previous one, but it was much more powerful and much faster. Jian Wushuang generated his soul power to form 3 demonic dragons that rushed to Ling Feibai. The purple sword light pierced 3 demonic dragons in an instant, and then bombarded the black tortoise again. Bang! This time, the giant black tortoises totally collapsed. Jian Wushuang himself was also attacked. The attack is so strong. Jian Wushuang was shocked by Ling Feibai's great power. Why can a universe god in the second heaven break both my black tortoise and the demonic dragon? His swordsmanship is extremely excellent. Besides, his divine power is extremely powerful. It is absolutely comparable to an ordinary universe god in the third heaven. King of Venomous Worms said to Jian Wushuang, as far as I know, he may have combined 3 strongest sword principles just as you did. He is as powerful as a universe god in the third heaven. Chapter 1408, Gold Divine Ape. Chapter 1408, Gold Divine Ape. 3 strongest sword principle? Isn't that the same as me? Jian Wushuang was shocked. He became universe god because he had merged 3 strongest sword principles. Hence, his explosion of divine power was stronger by 100 times than those at the same rank. Although Ling Feibai wasn't an inverse cultivator, if he were to really become universe god because he merged 3 strongest sword principle, his explosion of divine power would still be dozens of times stronger than those at the same rank. In other words, as a universe god in the second heaven, he could be evenly matched with an advanced universe god in the third heaven in terms of the explosion of divine power. On top of that, including the secret skill that he had cultivated, treasures that he possessed and unique skill that he had created. No wonder he could be evenly matched with a peak universe god in the third heaven 1,000 years ago. Now that 1,000 years had passed, he must be even stronger. Jian Wushuang was shocked. With such a strong power, it seems that if I don't perform any tricks, I might not even qualify to be his opponent. I'd better give it my all. Jian Wushuang's eyes were twinkling with brightness. A tremendous momentum of soul power surged the very next moment. The level of soul power was much higher than when he pulled off soul attack earlier. Vroom vroom vroom. His soul power churned in madness and it became a huge, gold divine ape that was more than 300 meters tall before all the disciples. There was golden light spurting out from the divine ape's eyes. The moment it appeared, it bellowed in anger. Its roar shook heaven and earth and its imposing force spread in all directions. Suddenly, the universe changed color. Outside of Titanic Star, the disciples who were watching the battle noticed the power that the gold divine ape gave out. They looked frightened. Above the boundless Milky Way, the Deacon Elderless too were shocked. That's divine ape. First, black tortoise. Then, demonic dragon. Now, even the strongest divine ape appeared. Could the manipulation method of consciousness that Zhen Wushuang cultivated be 5-beast soul manipulation knack? Yes, definitely. Black tortoise, demonic dragon, and divine ape are exactly the same. As for purple tiger and crimson phoenix, he has never performed it yet. This young man possesses such a profound manipulation method of soul. Those deacon elderless were experienced. Previously, when there was only demonic dragon and black tortoise, they let it be. Then, when the divine ape appeared, they immediately recognized the origin of the 5-beast soul manipulation knack. Of course, they could recognize that, but they couldn't tell that Zhen Wushuang had been using soul power, not consciousness. The 5-beast soul manipulation knack, I gave it to him, Hall Master Yuan suddenly said. The surrounding deacon elderless looked towards Hall Master Yuan. This young man is very good at consciousness attacks. However, he was inexperienced in the manipulation of consciousness. So I told Lei Chao to get the 5-beast soul manipulation knack for him. Of course, I didn't just give it to him. He paid a huge price for it. Hall Master Yuan smiled. The price that he was referring to was actually the fact that Zhen Wushuang had to pretend to be a universe god in the second heaven and received unfair treatment in Lineage of Star. Hearing Hall Master Yuan's explanation, the deacon elderless understood. TSK. To be able to perform divine ape not only represents that Zhen Wushuang's consciousness has reached the level of a peak universe god in the third heaven, but it also meant that he already reached the level of great achievement in the mastery of 5-beast soul manipulation knack. Now that divine ape is out, he could definitely be evenly matched with a peak universe god in the third heaven in terms of power. From what it seems, it won't be too easy for Ling Feibai to win first place in this rotation battle, a deacon elderless sighed. On Titanic Star, the gold divine ape that was 300 meters tall appeared in the universe while Zhen Wushuang stood right in the middle of the gold divine ape with his faint gold eyes. He fixed his gaze at Ling Baifei before him. There was a surge of murderous intention that soared up. This is fun. There was a flash of light twinkling in Ling Feibai's eyes too. The very next moment, he moved and appeared before the gold divine ape. He wielded the purple soft sword in his hand. A ray of purple sword light shot out and the power and size continuously increased during the process when it swept across the void. It finally reached the gold divine ape. Looking at the approaching purple sword light, Zhen Wushuang, who was in the gold divine ape, held Blood Mountain's sword and swung. Along with the swing, there was a gold sword that appeared in the gold divine ape's hand. It then imitated Zhen Wushuang's action. Bang! A terrifying gold sword light collided with the long purple sword shadow. After a shocking clash, the two sword lights dispersed. Oh! Ling Feibai raised his eyebrows and smirked, not bad. In terms of power, it's not weaker than a peak universe god in the third heaven that I once fought. I wonder how the other aspects are, too. Swoosh! Ling Feibai plunged forward. As he was charging forward, a boundless purple mist began spreading. Meteor shower. Whoa! In the purple mist, the rays of purple sword light were like meteorites. They showered down towards the gold divine ape's body. So fast. Zhen Wushuang revealed a face of terror and he quickly waved his sword to block the purple sword light. However, it was impossible for the gold divine ape's huge body to block off those fine meteor-like purple sword light. It most likely only blocked 1/3 of them. The rest of the 2/3 of the sword lights hit the gold divine ape's huge body, unfiltered. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Some parts of the divine ape's body were pierced by purple sword lights and there were holes all over. However, these holes were filled back instantly by soul power. Hence, the gold divine ape wasn't affected at all. A divine ape formed by consciousness. Even when it was pierced, it could recover immediately. Ling Feibai squinted his eyes and then smiled. How about this then? Swoosh. Ling Feibai's body suddenly moved and appeared by the side of the gold divine ape. He swung his purple soft sword. The sword light wasn't hindered and instantly penetrated the gold divine ape's throat. The gold divine ape's huge skull then flew off. However, although the gold divine ape was cut off, It was only a short while before it recovered. The skull could be recovered too. Ling Feibai creased his eyebrows, then he quickly loosened them again. Although it could be recovered, it would require an enormous amount of consciousness. Although your consciousness is strong, how long could you stand for if you kept using it? Ling Feibai's voice spread and Jian Wushuang, who was in the gold divine ape, suddenly felt strange. Chapter 1409, Jian Wushuang did all he could. Chapter 1409, Jian Wushuang did all he could. On the Titanic star. Whiz, whiz, whiz. The ghostly figure of Ling Feibai shuttled through the void and his existence could not be seen easily. Jian Wushuang could barely detect Ling Feibai's fast movements with his soul power. It was so fast that Jian Wushuang couldn't spare more effort to deal with Ling Feibai's further attack. Ling Feibai, while shuttling through the void, continued to operate his swordsmanship to penetrate the golden divine ape generated by Jian Wushuang or cut the ape's arms or head. Although Jian Wushuang could immediately restore the golden god ape with his soul power, it really exhausted his energy. I have to find a way to limit his power. Jian Wushuang blinked his eyes, turned his palms, and generated his blaze quicksand gourd. The quicksand of the gourd rushed out immediately. In an instant, the sand covered the whole vast Titanic star, surrounding Ling Feibai and causing great difficulties to him. You want to limit my power with only this? Ling Feibai grinned. More than that. Jian Wushuang shouted with a loud cry as a huge, scarlet fire burst out around his divine body, forming a scarlet sea of fire in a vast area around him. He now dominated the sea. Scarlet Kingdom, another secret skill. He used the secret skill from the Scarlet Island. At the beginning, he could only perform the first part of the secret skill, with his overall strength improved by 70%. Now, he could display the second part. Now with the skill, his overall strength has doubled. Blaze Quicksand Gourd weakened Ling Feibai's power, while Scarlet Kingdom improved Jian Wushuang's. Now, Jian Wushuang's power almost matched his rivals. Seeing this scene, Ling Feibai thought, you truly have many means, but unfortunately, they are useless. Then, Ling Fei generated a large number of waves, covering the entire Titanic star. The waves formed a domain and, at the same time, competed with Jian Wushuang's sand domain for dominance. But perhaps Ling Feibai's strength was stronger. Jian Wushuang's sand domain was suppressed and retreated. He also has a domain treasure? Jian Wushuang thought. It was easy to understand. After all, Ling Feibai was the genius in the lineage of star for so many years. It was normal to get some treasures after numerous adventures. Without the suppression of Jian Wushuang quicksand, Ling Feibai's power exploded, making Jian Wushuang feel pain and exhausting his soul power at an astonishing speed. The exertion of the ape alone has made my soul's strength extremely low. Now the Ling Feibai dependence is constantly harming the ape, and I have to constantly repair it. This consumes more of the soul's strength. It won't take long for my soul's strength to be exhausted. In every battle, participants always had a certain time to restore their divine power and soul power, and Jian Wushuang had also remaining at his peak. Nevertheless, with his current soul power, he could not use the divine ape for too long. I have to spare no effort before the power is exhausted. It would be good if I could defeat Ling Feibai. If not, I will give in. Jian Wushuang had already made the decision. He used his final skill, a black, mysterious spear. It was this peculiar spear that helped him kill Bei Xiu. The god-killing spear. Consciousness attacks treasures. And it seems that it is a high-level treasure. Deacons found it how remarkable the treasure was. Ling Feibai, you have to be careful. Jian Wushuang kindly reminded him, and then the dark, mysterious spear slowly floated up, appearing in the hands of the golden divine ape, whose power exploded. Ling Feibai was a little surprised. With my remaining soul power and divine power, I can still make 2 attacks. There you go. Jian Wushuang clenched his hands and a flash of light burst out. Secret skill of Tian Yuan. Bang! The first part, the secret skill of Tian Yuan, was inextinguishable light. And the second, eternal light. He hadn't been able to use the eternal light until his power reached the peak of a universe god in the third heaven after cultivation for 800 years. Eternal light was 100 times stronger than inextinguishable light. And, while the eternal light burst out, the golden ape, 100 feet tall, let out its power with a roar. Then, as the ape threw the god-killing spear in his hand directly, the eternal light instantly integrated into the spear. The eternal light got even more power when it was integrated with the spear. Feeling alarmed, Ling Feibai waved his purple sword. Sunset firmament. Boom. The disciples who had been watching the battle were all astonished by the great power. The deacons could recognize that the skill was a rank 3 unique skill. Lei Feibai's sword and Jian Wushuang's spear collided with each other. Bang! The spear blasted out and the golden divine ape also nearly broke down. The eternal light of the spear also went into the consciousness sea in Ling Feibai's divine body. His face went pale. As for Jian Wushuang, without the protection of the golden divine ape or the black tortoise, he was directly blasted out. Chapter 1410, Victory or Defeat. Chapter 1410, Victory or Defeat. Ling Feibai lifted his head and happened to see the crimson sun twinkling in Jian Wushuang's eyes that was charging towards him. Dreamland again? I told you, it won't affect me. Ling Feibai roared and his fierce consciousness charged. He shook off the dreamland instantly. Of course, although he had freed himself from the dreamland, it required some time for it to happen. At that moment, Jian Wushuang's eyes were twinkling with unprecedented light. I knew that it wouldn't be of any harm to you. But as long as it affected you by a slight amount, it would be enough. Jian Wushuang's roar reverberated in the entire Milky Way. Before the surrounding disciples' gazes, Jian Wushuang, who was close to Ling Feibai, gathered the churning divine power in his body all into his right index finger. The very next moment, the index finger that had gathered boundless divine power spurted gold brilliant light. Fourth finger of ancient god, God's Tess. Rumble. He pointed and the earth shattered. The entire Milky Way darkened. Among the boundless darkness, a huge bronze finger that seemed to extend over from the remote ages appeared. The huge bronze finger brought about an imposing force that could destroy the world. When it appeared, every disciple's face grew pale. Even the deacon elderless among the Milky Way were shocked by the sight. Bloodline power. Jian Wushuang has such a strong bloodline. This kind of bloodline should be an ancient god's bloodline, right? Ancient god was definitely the utmost supreme bloodline in eternal chaotic world. The ferocity of ancient god was well understood by the deacon elderless. Then, Jian Wushuang relied on his ancient god power to put his ancient god unique skill into full play, which was the fourth finger of ancient god. He had acquired the technique of the fourth finger after he had become a universe god in the first heaven and awakened again to inherit the memory. Only ancient gods above 5-star were qualified to perform that technique. Even Jian Wushuang barely performed it. However, he amazed the world with the single feat. Rumble. The bronze huge finger charged towards Ling Feibai. A terrifying manner suppressed the air and Ling Feibai was shocked. He had just freed himself from Jian Wushuang's dreamland and he had to deal with such a terrifying technique. Naturally, he was slightly slow in response. He couldn't dodge in time but he immediately performed a sword principle to break the huge bronze finger apart. Whoa! The eye-catching sword light suddenly erupted. Ling Baifei couldn't perform his unique skill in time and he only swung his sword. It gave out great power, especially a tearing power. Bang! The huge bronze finger collided with the sword light. A loud thud came along with pust. An enormous amount of divine power crushed and crashed. The eye-catching sword light wanted to tear down the huge bronze finger. However, Ling Feibai belittled the power of the fourth finger of ancient god. As it was a supreme unique skill of an ancient god, even though Jian Wushuang concentrated the ancient god power all over his body, he was only just able to perform the technique. If Ling Feibai could perform his unique skill, he would be able to resist or even tear off the huge finger. However, a random swing wouldn't be able to resist the huge bronze finger, let alone to tear it apart. The huge bronze finger gave out strong power and collapsed the sword light like breaking a piece of dead wood. Then, the huge finger covered Ling Feibai's body directly. No, Ling Feibai was frightened. Bang! The earth-shattering rumble was heard across Titanic Star and also the Milky Way. The huge bronze finger erupted its power entirely and formed a bronze divine storm while Ling Feibai drowned in it. It ended. Ling Feibai, did he lose? At the border of Titanic Star, the disciples were shocked at the sight. Jian Wushuang stood in the void panting, but his gaze was fixed on the inner part of the divine storm. Just then. Rumble. A scary aura suddenly swept out from the divine storm. The aura was extremely fierce and it broke off from the divine storm easily. What? Jian Wushuang's face changed and was replaced by a bitter smile. The disciples at the border of Titanic Star were in shock. They saw that after the soaring aura had broken the divine storm, a 3-meter-tall purple god which was covered with purple scales and had ferocious features appeared. The purple god held a purple, soft sword in his hand. Although there was a tremendous change in his body, there was no change in his appearance. The purple god was Ling Feibai. Supreme Heaven. Ling Feibai even used Supreme Heaven. It seems like he was cornered. Haha, to be able to force Ling Feibai to this stage is very good. The Deacon Elderless were chatting on the Milky Way. They knew that what Ling Feibai was going to do would be his strongest trump card. On Titanic Star, Jian Wushuang stood there calmly with a bitter face. Although the purple god that Ling Feibai transformed into had a soaring aura, his facial expression was one of embarrassment. He looked at Jian Wushuang apologetically. Sorry, I got too excited and used this technique subconsciously. Using this technique in the battle is rather unfair to all the disciples, including you. So, consider me a loser for this battle. The disciples heard what Ling Feibai said and they were astonished. Ling Feibai admitted defeat. But he won, no? Jian Wushuang lifted his head and looked at Ling Feibai. I lost and I can only blame myself for not being powerful enough. Plus, according to the rules of the battle, disciples must refrain from consuming elixirs or performing secret skills of Star Palace. But the secret skill that you performed is secret skill of Star Palace. It should be another secret skill from Scripture Depository, right? Yes, the secret skill is called Supreme Heaven, Ling Feibai nodded. I see, Jian Wushuang said calmly, there are 4 secret skills in Scripture Depository. The secret skill of Star Palace is basic. Any disciple of Star Palace could cultivate that. However, the other 3 secret skills would require one to pass through the 3rd floor of Star Tower in order to qualify to cultivate another one. You are able to cultivate Supreme Heaven and it must mean that you passed through the 3rd floor of Star Tower. You obtained it with your own power, how's that unfair? So, I am the one who lost this battle. Then, Jian Wushuang looked at the Deacon Elderly who stood not far away and said, Elderly, please announce the result then. The Deacon Elderly looked at Hall Master Yuan in the Milky Way. He then made the announcement when he saw Hall Master Yuan nod. Ling Feibai is the winner of this battle. Chapter 1411 A Sudden Change. Chapter 1411 A Sudden Change. The Deacon announced the results of the battle that Ling Feibai had won. This result, originally within the public's expectations, wouldn't be surprising to the many disciples who had watched the battle. But the result caused a stir. Many disciples began to talk about it. Ling Feibai almost lost. He wouldn't have lost the battle if he hadn't used the skills from the Golden Pavilion. Everyone couldn't help exclaiming about Jian Wushuang's power and skills, which had caused great difficulties to Ling Feibai. The Supreme Heaven that Ling Feibai had used was one of the 4 secret skills of the lineage of Star. Only cultivators reaching the 3rd level of the Stat Tower could learn and use it. Now, among the universe gods of the 2nd heaven, only Ling Feibai had reached the 3rd level of the Star Tower. It was reasonable and fair to use it in this battle. Jian Wushuang also admitted that Ling Feibai was indeed stronger than himself. I'm looking forward to battling with you next time. Ling Feibai looked at Jian Wushuang. Me too. Jian Wushuang nodded with a smile. Jian Wushuang was quite respectful to Ling Feibai after battling with him, especially when Ling Feibai had voluntarily conceded the battle. He decided to challenge Ling Feibai again when he improved his skills later. Jian Wushuang and Ling Feibai became good friends. But at that moment, an astonishingly loud sound suddenly burst out. Boom! An astonishing power of destruction, without any forewarning, spread directly all over the endless galaxy. It was accompanied by a resounding roar. What's happening? What's this? Everyone in the Titanic star raised his head. Hall Master Yuan and the other deacons also raised their heads to see what was happening. Oh! A brilliant, dazzling thunderstorm suddenly came, shocking everyone. This is a god test. Even Hall Master Yuan Palace was shocked, a god test without any signs. And the attack even penetrated the inherently powerful defense system of our lineage of star. Everyone was shocked and horrified. The thunderstorm crossed all the barriers and struck one figure. The figure was Jian Wushuang. Boom! The dazzling thunder burst apart over the divine body of Jian Wushuang, with a sweeping destructive power. Jian Wushuang stayed unscathed and calm. When the thunder had completely dissipated, Jian Wushuang looked at the sky, feeling surprised. The second god test is coming so early? Unexpectedly fast. Jian Wushuang tightened his hands with worry. In the middle of the galaxy, Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao looked at each other face to face, and they already understood why the thunder had suddenly come. This is a sign of Jian Wushuang's second inverse cultivation god test. The first sign of Jian Wushuang's god test was only a thundercloud. But now the sign of the second test had directly transformed into a thunderstorm. Obviously, the second god test would be way more difficult than the first. At this time, Hall Master Yuan ordered, Jian Wushuang, leave here with me. Everyone else, continue your battles. Then Jian Wushuang left the place with Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao. The disciples and deacons in the Titanic star were confused without knowing what was going on. Is Jian Wushuang's third god test coming? Many disciples speculated. But they knew that it had nothing to do with them, so they soon continued their battles. After a while, Jian Wushuang arrived at the Crystal Palace with Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao. They started to talk about the god test. Jian Wushuang, the sacred thunder should be the sign of your inverse cultivation test. Hall Master Yuan said. Yes. Jian Wushuang nodded. Oh my god, the mere sign of your god test equals others' inverse cultivation tests. Hall Master Yuan couldn't help exclaiming. Jian Wushuang, how soon will your inverse cultivation test be? Lei Chao asked. 10 years. Jian Wushuang answered. So soon. Both Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao were shocked. After all, ordinary practitioners had a relatively long period of time to prepare for their god test, at least a few hundreds of years, or even thousands of years. But now, Jian Wushuang only had 10 years to prepare for his second inverse cultivation test. It's too short indeed. Jian Wushuang agreed. Before his first god test, he was given 120 years to prepare, but now there was only 10 years. On that trajectory, Jian Wushuang's third inverse cultivation test would come directly without any preparation time. It's difficult to prepare in only 10 years. Lei Chao frowned. Indeed. The master of Yuan Dian looked over and said, but, fortunately, since you have an amazing performance in the battle, you can get a bonus. Besides, you have passed the 19th level of the illusionary mind C. According to the rules of our lineage of star, you can go to the scripture depository and choose another secret skill to practice. The second secret skill? Jian Wushuang asked. Among the 4 great secret skills, the most famous were secret skills of Star Palace, which were admired by all the disciples in the lineage of star. But if you wanted to practice the second secret, you needed to meet certain conditions. You needed to break through the 3rd floor of the Star Tower. But only the one who had passed the 3rd level of the Star Tower could cultivate another secret skill. Only Ling Feibai did. Why was Jian Wushuang also eligible to do so? Apart from passing the 3rd level of the Star Tower, the other condition is for a universe god in the 2nd heaven to pass above the 18th level of the illusionary mind C. As you have passed through the 19th level, you are qualified to practice the second secret skill. Hall Master Yuan said, I intended to tell you about it after you finished the battle, but now it's time to let you know. The preparation time is only 10 years. You should get the second secret skill as soon as possible. Chapter 1412, State of Mind. Chapter 1412, State of Mind. 10 years is really too short. In such a short period of time, even if you picked a suitable secret skill from the scripture depository, you wouldn't have time to cultivate it. Hall Master Yuan creased his eyebrows. The 4 secret skills in Lineage of Star, every single one of them was impressive. If Jian Wushuang were to cultivate the other secret skills under the prerequisite of the secret skill of Star Palace, the possibility of passing the inverse cultivation test would definitely increase tremendously. It was a pity that he didn't have enough time. After all, the stronger the secret skill, the tougher it was to cultivate. Just like the few secret skills in scripture depository, no matter how brilliant a genius one was, no one could expect to learn the fundamentals without a dozen years of training. Hence, 10 years wasn't enough. Forget about the secret skills. You can't prepare too many things in 10 years. The most important part is understanding the second inverse cultivation test more and being mentally prepared. That will heighten the possibility of passing, Lei Chao said. You're right, Hall Master Yuan nodded in agreement. If it were just an ordinary cultivator's God's test, they wouldn't need to be so worried over the fact that they only had 10 years to prepare. The most crucial point was that Jian Wushuang was going through an inverse cultivation test. They weren't familiar with inverse cultivation tests. They didn't know what Jian Wushuang would come across during his second inverse cultivation test. The unknown is always the scariest. Jian Wushuang, you've been through your first inverse cultivation test. Tell us what you have been through during your first inverse cultivation test. We shall help to predict, Hall Master Yuan said. Jian Wushuang immediately described his experience of first inverse cultivation briefly. After that, both Hall Master Yuan and Lei Chao both looked terrified. The first inverse cultivator test has a total of 9 sacred thunder. And the very last one was a combination of thunder test, fire test, and mind test altogether. Oh my God! The 2 experts were astonished. Just the very first inverse cultivator test already combined thunder test, fire test, and mind time. I really couldn't imagine what you would come across during your second inverse cultivator test. Hall Master Yuan looked at Jian Wushuang. I can't tell either, Lei Chao shook his head, but he beamed with joy and said, we can't tell because we don't really know much about inverse cultivation. We seldom once see people passing inverse cultivation test. However, the Palace Master is powerful and knowledgeable. Who knows? He might know something about the second inverse cultivation test. Palace Master? Hall Master Yuan too was delighted. Palace Master of Star Palace, the founder of Lineage of Star, the supreme expert on the top of the pyramid in eternal chaotic world, was an ancient existence who had lived for God knows how long. Such a supreme expert must know more about inverse cultivation than they did. Let me ask Palace Master now. Hall Master Yuan immediately sent an inquiry through the communication token. Soon, there was a reply. The Palace Master said that the inverse cultivators are the most unique existences in the eternal chaotic world. It is too rare in the eternal chaotic world. Even he didn't know much about the inverse cultivation test. However, he once talked to another Almighty many years back. The Almighty brought up inverse cultivation and also the inverse cultivation test. The second inverse cultivation test seems to focus not on the power but on mind, Hall Master Yuan said. Mind? State of mind? Jian Wushuang's pupils contracted. Isn't it like a mind test then? Lei Chao looked over. Different. Hall Master Yuan shook his head. It's another test aimed at one's mind. However, inverse cultivation tests are much scarier than mind test. Jian Wushuang looked solemn. State of mind. State of mind and consciousness, they were entirely different. The strength of consciousness constantly improved along with the improvement of cultivator's power. However, state of mind would only improve continuously through life encounters. Some had it smooth sailing all their lives until they reached the top. Even if they were extremely powerful, their state of mind might not be strong. But some people were very weak in strength, their state of mind was extremely strong, as they'd been through many tough experiences. Jian Wushuang belonged to the latter group. Ever since he had risen up from the ancient world, he encountered countless frustrations and hardships. He struggled again and again on the verge of life and death. Through such situations, he had been strengthened. His heart was so firm and tenacious that it was never shaken. However, he was dealing with an inverse cultivation test after all. He couldn't be definite that his state of mind could pass through the inverse cultivation test. As we know that the second inverse cultivation test focuses on state of mind. We will figure some methods out over the next few training years. Hall Master Yuan squinted and continued, in eternal chaotic world, there are many mystery lands and unique places that could give good training to one's state of mind. You only have 10 years. You don't have to go to those mystery lands, but you can try in this one place. Where? Jian Wushuang looked. Dark Phoenix Pavilion, Hall Master Yuan replied. Dark Phoenix Pavilion is second to Lineage of Star in Starland. There are many experts and even real god experts. The one thing lacking was that they didn't have an almighty in charge. In Dark Phoenix Pavilion, there's a training ground called Mind Cliff. It focuses on training state of mind. It is quite famous on Starland, even throughout the entire Purple Moon Sanctuary. If you were to train for a few years on Mind Cliff, it should be helpful to you. Mind Cliff. Jian Wushuang nodded. Lineage of Star has always been revered by Dark Phoenix Pavilion. If I were to talk to their pavilion master personally and send some treasures over, it shouldn't be a problem for you to train for a few years on Mind Cliff, Hall Master Yuan said. If so, sorry for the trouble, Hall Master Yuan. Jian Wushuang expressed his gratitude. No big deal. Plus, you performed well in the battle. Theoretically, you should be granted many things. These are just extras. Consider it the price to pay for Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Hall Master Yuan smiled and instructed again. Lei Chao, you will bring this young man to Dark Phoenix Pavilion personally then. All right, Lei Chao nodded. During the years you are in Dark Phoenix Pavilion, I'll have people clear up Firmament World as a place for you to pass through your inverse cultivation test, Hall Master Yuan said. Firmament World was an independent space. There were no cultivators or living things in it. Although Lineage of Star controlled the world, it was useless normally. If it were to be used as a venue to pass through an inverse cultivation test, it'd be the best option. It was a place cut off from external worlds. Regardless of how great the power and movement Jian Wushuang's inverse cultivation test was, no one would notice. Go ahead. Hall Master Yuan waved. Soon, Jian Wushuang headed to the Dark Phoenix Pavilion with Lei Chao. Chapter 1413, Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Chapter 1413, Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Dark Phoenix Pavilion was well known in the Starland. The majority of disciples there were female and only a tiny fraction were male. Jian Wushuang and Lei Chao spent only a few days going through the wormhole before they arrived at the gate of the Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Although Dark Phoenix Pavilion couldn't rival the incomparable majesty of the Lineage of Star, it was also boundless and occupied a huge mountain range. Go and tell your master that we've arrived. Lei Chao said coldly to a guard here. Please wait a moment, my lord. The guard disciple immediately went to inform his master. After just a moment, a graceful woman in purple surrounded by a large number of figures came from the Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Lei Chao, long time no see. The woman stopped in front of Lei Chao and looked straight at him. Hello, Su Ru. Lei Chao also responded. Obviously, they had known each other for a long time. A few days ago, I received a message from Hall Master Yuan. I knew that there would be a real god in the stars and a disciple coming to visit my pavilion. But I didn't expect you to come. So, you seem to value this little guy a lot, huh? The woman looked at Jian Wushuang with great interest. Now you know where I'm coming from. Just take us to the Mind Cliff. Lei Chao said indifferently. Don't hurry. Su Ru raised his eyebrows and at the same time turned around, saying, Come with me. Lei Chao followed Su Ru and others to the Mind Cliff immediately. On the way to the Mind Cliff. Lei Chao, is Su Ru your friend or something? Jian Wushuang asked. Lei Chao nodded slightly. She is the master of Dark Phoenix Pavilion and also a real god. We've made several acquaintances. Okay, Jian Wushuang said. And then Su Ru, who was leading the way ahead, suddenly turned around and asked Jian Wushuang, "What's your name?" "Jian Wushuang." He answered politely. "Disciples of the Star Palace?" asked Su Ru. "Yes." "Oh, good. I've long heard that all the disciples in Star Palace are extremely gifted. In my Dark Phoenix Pavilion there are also many disciples, but they are too proud and always at odds with each other. It brings me a lot of pressure. Now that you are a disciple from the Star Palace, you can help me deal with them and give them a lesson." She smiled softly. "Su Ru, we have no time to help you," Lei Chao said. "It won't take too long. If he helps me, I can provide me a place in the Mind Cliff for free in return. How about that?" Su Ru smiled. Jian Wushuang didn't know how to respond. Before he replied, Su Ru tried to persuade him. "Come with me, my disciples can't wait to see you." She sped up. Jian Wushuang looked at Lei Chao for help. Lei Chao frowned and whispered, "Jian Wushuang, I owed her a favor, and this is Dark Phoenix Pavilion, I can't refuse her. Just follow her. It won't take long." "Fine." Jian Wushuang followed Su Ru. Soon, they arrived at a battlefield. This was the place where the Dark Phoenix Pavilion held battles on weekdays. Now the battlefield was crowded with disciples from the Dark Phoenix Pavilion. A few days ago when Su Ru had received a message from Hall Master Yuan, she had informed all her disciples of the coming of Jian Wushuang. Many disciples seemed very excited. 4 disciples from the Dark Phoenix Pavilion, the lineage of Star was the absolute hegemony in the Starland, with numerous admirable talents. Top geniuses of the Dark Phoenix Pavilion would only be normal disciples in the lineage of Star. And the best disciples of the Star Palace were the top of the top. So many disciples in the Dark Phoenix Pavilion were curious about those from the Starland and even envied them. Those envying disciples thought that they were actually not inferior to disciples from the Starland. So, hearing Jian Wushuang coming, everyone was eager to have a look. When Su Ru and Jian Wushuang arrived, disciples waiting in the battlefield got excited. "Here comes the disciple of the Star Palace. He looks just mediocre. It's difficult to distinguish one's power simply by his breath or appearance. As a disciple from the Starland, he must be excellent." Many disciples were having a heated discussion about Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang could feel many beady eyes looking at him. Strong aggressiveness, Jian Wushuang thought. "All right, be quiet." Su Ru started to speak. Her voice was very plain and soft, but it sounded like thunder in the ears of every disciple in the battlefield. Everyone in the battlefield immediately went quiet. "I would like to introduce to you this disciple of the Star Palace, Jian Wushuang. It is a very rare opportunity to meet him in our Dark Phoenix Pavilion. You should cherish the chance." Su Ru smiled softly. As soon as she spoke, many of the disciples immediately got excited and aggressive. "Su Ru is encouraging her disciples to challenge me?" Jian Wushuang frowned. Lei Chao decided to say something. "It's unfair to us. We are just guests who want to go to the Mind Cliff." "Unfair?" Su Ru questioned. "Was it fair that you left me alone? What I am doing to your disciple is nothing compared with what you did to me." Lei Chao looked embarrassed. Su Ru sneered, "I have always been in awe of the stars in Dark Phoenix Pavilion and absolutely daren't cause difficulties for disciples the lineage of Star. But this time is different. It's you that brought him there. I just want to challenge you, Lei Chao," Su Ru said. Chapter 1414 Challenge. Chapter 1414 Challenge. Hearing what Su Ru said, Lei Chao turned pale with rage. The surrounding experts from Dark Phoenix Pavilion looked strange. They had known since long ago about the ambiguous relationship between their pavilion master and Lei Chao. Hence, they wasn't surprised by Su Rui's action. Soon, Lei Chao let out a sigh and looked at Jian Wushuang again. "Jian Wushuang, go ahead and exchange some experiences with the disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion." "All right," Jian Wushuang nodded. As Jian Wushuang agreed, the disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion on the training ground beamed with joy. The few that had wanted to launch an attack long ago immediately came forward. "Jian Wushuang, core disciple of Dark Phoenix Pavilion, Liu Shea, want to challenge you. I've heard that the disciple of Star Palace from Lineage of Star are all gifted and they are all monstrous. I finally get to see it with my own eyes. Fight with me, Jian Wushuang, let me challenge you. I'd like to see how strong the disciple of Star Palace is. In the noise, there were almost a dozen disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion who stood out. Those disciples had soaring fighting intentions. They were dying to fight Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. There's too many of you. If I were to take every single challenge, God knows how long it would take. As you are all from the same sect, you should know one another's power well. Why not pick 3 of your strongest to fight me? Jian Wushuang said swiftly. Hearing what Jian Wushuang had said, the disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion quickly agreed. In a short while, 3 people appeared before Jian Wushuang. All 3 of them were female. Jian Wushuang, I'm Liu Shea. I'm at the 3rd place among the universe gods in the 2nd heaven in Dark Phoenix Pavilion. I'll fight against you first. The maiden in a red robe named Liu Shea held a long whip as she stared at Jian Wushuang. Let's begin. Jian Wushuang looked solemn as he thought, as they are coming at me because of my identity as a disciple of Star Palace, I can lose the names of the disciple of Star Palace. I shall put the Dreamland technique to work straight away and take care of them straightforwardly. Jian Wushuang had made up his mind. Very soon, Liu Shea took action. The long whip in her hand suddenly transformed into a huge green dragon. The huge dragon gave out a strong power and charged toward Jian Wushuang. Before the disciples of Dark Phoenix Pavilion, Jian Wushuang didn't move an inch, nor did he take out his Blood Mountain sword. But there was a flash of crimson light that erupted in his eyes. The crimson light was like a crimson sun, extremely eye-catching. Everyone was attracted by the crimson sun uncontrollably. Ah! Liu Shea screamed in pain and she went pale in agony. However, Jian Wushuang let out a sigh leisurely and dotted Liu Shea's forehead with his fingertip. He then dismissed the Dreamland. Without the influence of Dreamland, Liu Shea had her consciousness recovered, but she realized that Jian Wushuang's finger was on her forehead. If Jian Wushuang were using a sword instead of his finger, she'd be dead. How could this be? Liu Shea looked like she was in disbelief. She couldn't accept what had happened. You lost. Jian Wushuang said softly and turned to leave. Liu Shea looked lost, but the very next movement, she clenched her fist and looked at Jian Wushuang in his eyes as she stepped back. The sight stirred up a commotion among the disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion surrounding the training field. Senior Liu Shea was defeated so easily. It's Dreamland. Senior Liu Shea just drowned into phantasmagoria, such a terrifying phantasmagoria. The disciples from Dark Phoenix Pavilion were astonished. He had lived up to his name as a disciple of Star Palace. He defeated Liu Shea, who was at the 3rd place in Dark Phoenix Pavilion. Lei Chao, your disciple in Lineage of Star has a really strong consciousness. His phantasmagoria seems impressive. Su Ru stole a glance at Lei Chao. He's not only good at this. However, the geniuses in Dark Phoenix Pavilion shouldn't be able to force him to put in his full effort, Lei Chao said. Oh, yeah? Su Ru sneered. Then, the genius disciple on the 2nd place took a stand. It's a pity that the disciple was around Liu Shea's standard. Her only advantage over Liu Shea was that she knew that Jian Wushuang was good at consciousness attacks and phantasmagoria, so she took preventative measures. Even though she was prepared, she couldn't resist Jian Wushuang's phantasmagoria. The 2 geniuses were defeated in an instant. Her defeated outcome was the same as Liu Shea. Of the strongest 3 from Dark Phoenix Pavilion, 2 were defeated in the blink of an eye. The last was a beautiful lady in black with a cold aura. There was a murderous manner in the beautiful lady's eyes. Ling give your all. Don't embarrass your master, Su Ru spoke. Master? How dare you take a disciple of your own? Lei Chao looked at Su Ru in shock. Why? Can't I? Su Ru laughed. Lei Chao shrugged and remained silent. Jian Wushuang looked at the girl in black before him. He could feel that the girl in black was much stronger than the 2 previous girls. Come on, Jian Wushuang's voice was cold. As you wish, The girl in black didn't hesitate. She moved her wrist and a black long spear appeared in her hand. Her figure moved and she appeared before Jian Wushuang in an instant. Swoosh! The black long spear went through the void and flew towards Jian Wushuang. So fast! Jian Wushuang was surprised. Amongst universe gods in the second heaven, the only person who used a spear like this was Long Feibai. He was only slightly faster than this girl in black, just slightly. Vroom! The boundless soul power swept out and suddenly Jian Wushuang had created a huge black tortoise. He blocked the girl in black's attack with the tortoise shell while he quickly lifted his head to put 18 Azura Hell secret skill to play. One would not be able to resist if he or she didn't have a certain level of consciousness strength. The terrifying effect of dreamland surged around them and the girl in black looked shocked. However, she recovered very quickly and the black long spear in her hand never paused. She blocked it so easily. Jian Wushuang looked surprised. Bang! The black long spear hit the black tortoise shell and a fierce power erupted. It shook the black tortoise vigorously. Catcher, catcher! There were a few fine cracks on the surface of the black tortoise and the very next moment, it exploded. Broke my black tortoise defense with one stab? Jian Wushuang was surprised and he didn't dare to drag on the match for any longer. A sudden boundless soul power soared. Roar! Along with the earth-shattering roar, a gold divine ape that was more than 300 meters tall and had a soaring rage suddenly appeared in the universe. Chapter 14:15 Mind Cliff. Chapter 14:15 Mind Cliff. As the golden divine ape appeared, its enormous power instantly converged on the palm of the ape's right hand. Boom! The divine ape punched the woman's black spear directly. Bang! With a loud noise, the powerful collision of the spear and the divine ape caused a great force to the woman, making her hands numb. The woman got nervous. The golden ape moved forward step by step and continued the attack. Boom! 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 Several big fists fell in succession with great power. The woman dressed in black defended with her spear, generating a strange whirlpool to engulf everything including the attacking force of the ape. Bang! The sound of continuous collisions resounded. Finally, the woman couldn't resist anymore. She was blasted out directly, extremely weak and exhausted. The giant golden divine ape that Jian Wushuang generated continued to grow in power, showing no sign of weakening. You are defeated. Jian Wushuang looked at the woman indifferently and calmly, but he was shocked in his mind. I had to generate the divine ape dozens of times, nearly consuming 70% of my power to defeat her. If she had used other secret skills instead of confronting me face to face, maybe I would have lost the game. Although the Dark Phoenix Pavilion can't be compared with the lineage of Star, the best disciples here are no worse than disciples in the Star Palace. As for the woman in black, she clenched her hands tightly, her eyes full of unwillingness. Linger, you can go back, Su Ru said. The woman nodded slightly and went away. Su Ru, she is an excellent disciple, she is too proud. Lei Chao said, if she didn't choose to confront Jian Wushuang face to face, but relied on her other secret skills, she may have prevailed against the attack of the golden divine ape. She's like you. Lei Chao knew very well that Su Ru was also a proud lady. Well, there's no excuse for the defeat. We lost. Su Ru said indifferently. It's incredible for a universe god in the second heaven to have such a strong consciousness, and also to have such a good command of the 5-beast soul manipulation knack. He is worth the reputation of Star Palace. Now, can you take us to the Mind Cliff? Lei Chao asked. Come with me, Su Ru said. Soon, Jian Wushuang and Lei Chao were heading for the Mind Cliff with Su Ru. Jian Wushuang's battle with Ling had caused a stir in the battlefield. Disciples of the Star Palace are indeed powerful. That's true. I thought that Ling was already one of the most powerful universe god in the second heaven, but I was wrong. But although Ling lost, she could almost catch up with Jian Wushuang in terms of the overall strength. The discussion continued for a long time. The disciples had never seen the strength of the Star Palace disciples before. They had some doubts about the strength of the Star Palace disciples and wanted to challenge them. But now they had really witnessed the battle and realized that they were far behind. The Mind Cliff, located in the center of Dark Phoenix Pavilion, was a huge mountain, standing tall. And the mountain was covered by a special power force. Now we are in the Mind Cliff, Suru said. Jian Wushuang looked at the huge mountain in front of him. The mountain was so tall that Jian Wushuang couldn't see the peak. In the middle of the mountain, there was a stairway leading to the top of the mountain. The stairway looked extraordinary. Heart Cliff has a total of 999 steps, and each step is an experience for the heart. The higher the stair is, the more difficult it is for the heart. Suru said, Jian Wushuang, since you have come here to cultivate your mind, you can first try your best to step on these steps and see how many you can climb. I see. Jian Wushuang nodded and started to move to the bottom of the mountain. As soon as he had stepped on the first step, a strong force came to surround him. Phantasmagoria? Jian Wushuang realized what the force was. Phantasmagoria was aimed at the consciousnesses and minds of cultivators. Specifically, being able to resist the phantasmagoria depended on the strength of the consciousness. If the consciousness was not enough, cultivators should turn to their mind. For example, the 18 Azura Hell was a powerful phantasmagoria. Cultivators without a strong consciousness had to undergo all kinds of torments. So, it was also a test of mind. Only cultivators with a resilient mind could survive such a torment, or they would go mad. Now on the first step of the Mind Cliff, he couldn't resist the phantasmagoria only with his consciousness strength. He could keep his mind peaceful and resilient. This phantasmagoria was like a prison. Bang! Jian Wushuang was tied to a pillar and could not move, while someone wielded a whip around his body and beat him crazily, causing many scars and resulting in a painful heart. This physical pain? It's nothing. Jian Wushuang thought it was nothing. He stayed calm and smiled. This first level of the phantasmagoria was only the physical pain of a cultivator's body and only a tiny mental pain, which even ordinary people who were patient enough could easily bear, let alone Jian Wushuang. With a faint smile, Jian Wushuang resisted the whipping and kept still. A moment later, the first level of the phantasmagoria collapsed, and Jian Wushuang managed to step onto the second step. The second step was still the physical pain of flesh and skin. However, the pain was such that Jian Wushuang's skin peeled. Near the Heart Cliff, Lei Chao stood side by side with Su Ru. They watched Jian Wushuang walking up the steps. From beginning to the end, Jian Wushuang stayed calm and he finally got into the 201st floor. It's all on the 201st floor, but he was still calm. His mind is not weak at all, Su Ru said. You are right. Lei Chao nodded. Then why did you decide to send him here? Su Ru asked. Chapter 1416, The 400th Step. Chapter 1416, The 400th Step. If I'm not mistaken, he should be here for the mind test, right? Su Ru looked at Lei Chao. The scariest mind test in God's test was aimed at the state of mind. It was normal for geniuses like Jian Wushuang to come across a mind test in God's test. Guess as you wish, Lei Chao didn't answer directly. On Mind Cliff, Jian Wushuang continued to proceed step by step. In the beginning, he was rather relaxed. However, when he reached the 300th step, he slowed down in speed and he didn't look as relaxed as before. There was a hidden misery in his facial expression. There are 999 steps to the peak of the Mind Cliff and he already felt a slight pressure on the 300th step. The following steps will be an obstacle for him and it will train his state of mind. Su Ru smiled and stole a glance at Lei Chao next to her. She said, if there's no accident, the young man will spend another few years around this range of steps. Lei Chao, do you want to stay here or leave? I'll wait for him here, Lei Chao replied coldly. Up to you. I have business to take care of. I will not keep you company. Please do as you like. Su Ru turned around and left. Lei Chao was left alone as he waited in silence. The time flew past. Jian Wushuang had been on Mind Cliff all this while. With the aid of Phantasmagoria on Mind Cliff, he continued to train his state of mind. Then, He was standing on the 331st step when he suddenly opened his eyes. Then, he took a step forward and reached the 331st step. The 332nd step. That's impressive. There were a few disciples of Dark Phoenix Pavilion gathered around Mind Cliff. They were astonished by Zhen Wushuang's performance on Mind Cliff. I remembered when Senior Qiu Ling were challenging Mind Cliff back then, she only reached the 328th step. Senior Qiu Ling, among the disciples of Dark Phoenix Pavilion, regardless of power or state of mind, she was the strongest. Plus, she had trained many times on Mind Cliff. But she only reached the 328th step. Her result can't be compared favorably with Zhen Wushuang's, even though he is here for the first time. Zhen Wushuang is really terrifyingly powerful and his state of mind is even scarier. The disciples were amazed. Stepping foot on the 332nd step represented the fact that Zhen Wushuang's state of mind was strong. One should know that even universe gods on the peak to the minority of real gods who weren't strong in a state of mind might not even step foot on the 300th step. Zhen Wushuang was still continuing his journey up. In the blink of an eye, 5 years passed. On Mind Cliff, Zhen Wushuang had already laid foot on the 389th step. The 389th step, the 390th step. In the void next to Mind Cliff, Qiu Ling and Liu Xie stood side by side. They could see Zhen Wushuang stepping foot on the 390th step of Mind Cliff clearly. Senior, it has been 300 years since you were last on Mind Cliff. You should have improved tremendously for the past 300 years. If you were to go on Mind Cliff again, would you be able to catch up with Zhen Wushuang? Liu Xie looked at Qiu Ling and asked. No way, Qiu Ling shook her head directly. With my current power, I could only try to pass the 330th step. Among universe gods in the second heaven, it is considered rather impressive. But Zhen Wushuang, he is so much more outstanding than we are. The 390th step. According to Master, there are many real gods of Dark Phoenix Pavilion who stopped at the 390th step. In terms of state of mind, Zhen Wushuang is no weaker than those real gods. Monster. I wonder how he got his state of mind. Liu Xie sighed. How? Qiu Ling smiled faintly, repeated failure and lots of training. Some geniuses are like that. The bigger the failure, the tougher the training, so they get to be even more brilliant. On the contrary, if a genius were to lack experience of failure and training, his gifted talent would be wasted. Zhen Wushuang is that kind of genius. If I guess correctly, he should have experienced countless obstacles since he started cultivation. The obstacles that he has been through are not something either of us could compare to. He grew up through the obstacles and became who he is today. He is an impressive genius. I can't be compared favorably with him. Qiu Ling was a true genius too, and she was confident in her personal talent. She was not someone who would admit defeat easily. Even when she had lost to Zhen Wushuang previously, she never thought that she was weaker than Zhen Wushuang but merely lacking time and chances. But then, looking at Zhen Wushuang's performance on Mind Cliff, especially after Zhen Wushuang had stepped foot on the 390th step, she decided not to challenge Zhen Wushuang anymore. She knew clearly that Zhen Wushuang didn't get that strong out of nowhere. I heard from the Pavilion Tower that Zhen Wushuang is going to stay in Dark Phoenix Tower for 10 years. 5 years have passed and he has stepped foot on the 390th step. There are 5 years left. I wonder if he could step foot on the 400th step, Liu Xie said. The 400th step. Qiu Ling's pupils contracted. I heard from Master that there are 999 steps on Mind Cliff and the 400th step is a huge threshold. It isn't that easy to pass. The real gods of Dark Phoenix Pavilion mostly stopped below 400 steps. There is hardly anyone who has stepped foot on 400 steps or above. If Zhen Wushuang were to step foot on the 400th step within the remaining 5 years, it would be really impressive. I hope he doesn't. Otherwise, our difference will be too vast, Liu Xie muttered. Let's go. Qiu Ling and Liu Xie left shortly afterwards. Zhen Wushuang, who was by then on the 390th step of Mind Cliff, was suffering indefinitely in the dreamland. As he reached the 390th step, it was rather difficult for him to pass through even if it was his dreamland. A month later, he finally stepped foot on the 391st step. 3 months later, he had gotten to the 392nd step. The time continued to fly past. Out of the 10 years' time, there was only one last year left and it passed in the blink of an eye. The second inverse cultivation test was ascending in a month's time. Dark Phoenix Pavilion, in the void by Mind Cliff, Lei Chao had been guarding Mind Cliff for the past 10 years. He had never once left. One last month left. Lei Chao was calculating the time quietly while his gaze was fixed on Jian Wushuang on Mind Cliff. But then, on Mind Cliff, Jian Wushuang, who was stuck on the 399th step for a year, suddenly took a leap and stepped onto the 400th step firmly. As his foot touched the step, his figure shivered and his aura experienced a tremendous change. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.